so.
Yeah.
So we'll get to go through this, and then afterwards, I'll talk just very briefly, and then we can field some questions from you guys. All right.
Awesome. First, I want to say thank you all for coming. This has been awesome. This is our last show. We've done 25 shows this year, and this is our last one. We wanted it, my wife and I wanted to be on home turf, so we're super psyched to be here in Massachusetts, Framingham, and this is awesome. Thank you. It's been 30th anniversary of the Turtles this year, and we couldn't have gotten here without you guys, and that's just absolutely fantastic. I appreciate it very much. You guys know this cover? This is the first issue of the Turtles. The Turtles were inspired by, Peter and I had a great love of comic books, especially Jack Kirby was a big hero and inspiration for us. And when we came up with the idea for the Turtles, we wanted to put everything we liked about comics, all our favorite comic isms, New Mutants, Dave Sim's Cerebus, animal characters, Frank Miller's Daredevil, and we sort of put them all into a blender, and out came the Turtles. And this is one of my favorite pages. I like to show this because the very first time I met Peter Laird, again, we were both huge Jack Kirby fans, and I'd never seen a Jack Kirby original before. And I went into his studio in this tiny little apartment in Northampton, Massachusetts, and he had this hanging on the wall, and I literally almost passed out. I was like, that was great. He gave it to me years later, and it was just a fantastic treat. This is the house that the Turtles were created in. Yeah. This was in Dover, New Hampshire. I worked on the coast. I grew up in Maine, and from Memorial Day to Labor Day, we cooked lobsters and tried to make enough money to make it through the winter. And I had met Pete. Again, Jack Kirby hit it off, comic book artist, and we moved into this place. There's my first studio. That's actually that chair. I couldn't afford a desk at that time. So we found this little chair sitting on the side of the road, like a secondhand thing, and put it in. I used to draw with a laptop, like a lap board. And it was here at that chair in 1983 that I had this idea where Peter used to watch what I called the worst TV shows ever. In my opinion, it was like T.J. Hooker, The A-Team and stuff. So I felt it was my job to annoy him as much as possible while he was watching the shows. And so late one night I did this sketch, and I said, this is going to be the next thing, and it was this. It's the very first turtle ever drawn. It was Michelangelo. As you know, he became Michelangelo later. But I thought to myself, if Bruce Lee was an animal character, what would be the dumbest character that Bruce Lee would be? And having grown up in Maine and playing with turtles at my grandmother's lake house and all that stuff, turtles came to mind immediately. So I did this sketch, and then Peter did the second one. Changed a few things, kind of studio one-upmanship. I do something, you have to do something else, so improve on it. And so then I had to top his drawing, so I did this drawing. And this was the very first drawing of all four turtles together. I did it in pencil, and I put this comic book logo that said, Ninja Turtles, and Pete added the Teenage Mutant to it. And again, we were laughing our butts off. We said, this is really the dumbest thing we've ever seen in our life. And so the next day we got up and said, because we didn't have any distracting paint work going on, we said, well, why don't we come up with a story that kind of tells how the Turtles got to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And that was in November of 1983. A lot of people ask where the Turtles' names come from. When I went to high school, I was a big, I loved art. I love all kinds of art. I especially loved art history in general. And in my graduating class at Westbrook High School, this was my tribute. I painted this on the wall. 1980, Westbrook High School was my tribute to Leonardo da Vinci. And so Pete and I were coming up with the names of the turtles. We said, well, traditional Asian names aren't silly enough for this concept. Doug, Bob, Steve, still not silly enough. And I said, well, how about something like Leonardo da Vinci or Leonardo and Michelangelo? And Pete loved it and he laughed. And so we had Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, the first ones. And then I like Bernini as a sculptor much better than Donatello, but we sort of flipped a coin and ended up with Donatello, and so that's where the origin of the names came from. When we put out the first issue, I had a $500 income tax return. We cleaned up all $200 from Pete's bank account. We borrowed $1,000 from my uncle, and with that we were able to print 3,000 copies, and we were trying to figure out how to make the world aware that the turtles had arrived. Ha ha ha. And so Pete had this great idea. We put out a series of press releases. This was the original press release from 1984. We included sample art. Here's the cover. Here's how you could, it's here, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And this is how you could order. We didn't think we'd really sell that many copies, but we figured we'd offer it for sale through, $1.50 plus postage and send it to our address in Dover, New Hampshire. This was where the Turtles premiered. It was a very small convention. Actually, Ralph DiBernardo, who's got a booth up here. Ralph ran the original comic convention that we premiered the Turtles at in May 5th, I think, of 1984. I should know that by now, right? It was great. We tried to invite as many friends and family to the show so that we'd have people around our booth. But yeah, so 30 years ago this year, we had the first Turtle issue premiered, and it was really exciting this year because we did a free comic book day signing May 4th of 2014. Pete and I were together. First time we'd done a signing in about 20 years, and it was a great way to celebrate. And it was at Ralph's shop in Rochester, New Hampshire, where Ralph ran the first show. So it was awesome. This is me trying to grow a mustache. We did this is what we look like. We had this chart on the wall, so each time we finished each of the 40 pages of the Turtles, we crossed out sort of blacked in half a square when it was finished penciled, and we blacked in the other half of the square was finished inked, and here we are together crossing off the final square of the final page, and the first issue is officially done. So now we're ready to take it to the printer, and that's the first cover. So, very inspired by, I mentioned, New Mutants, Dave Sim Service, Frank Miller's Daredevil. Frank Miller's Ronin is a real revelation to me as a concept, and so we kind of parodied that cover in our first issue. A lot of people ask, there were only 3,000 copies done in the first issue, and a lot of people ask, how can you tell the difference? Not only is there, on the inside front cover, it's just got a dedication to Frank Miller and Jack Kirby, but on the back cover, we put this ad where it featured two original comics we did before the Turtles, and in those days we would go down to the local copy store, copy center, drive the copier guy nuts as we printed out, I think, 50 copies of each of these gobbledygook. So this was the ad and the inside back cover of the first issue, and that kind of sets it apart from the other ones. As I mentioned before, when we did the first issue, we positively wouldn't sell any copies. So when we actually picked them up at the local printer in New Hampshire, we brought them into the studio and we made furniture out of it. So we have a coffee table, an end table, that's stacked in the corners all over the studio. And this is literally the original first issue sitting in front of our studio. And we called it Mirage Studios because it was a mirage. We didn't have a studio. And that's the origin of the This is actually at the signing in Dover, New Hampshire, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Still work on a mustache. That made it a little better there. But it was the first appearance we did in the first appearance of the Turtles. After we finished the first issue, like I said, I cooked lobsters on the coast of Maine. That's how I made my money to survive the year. So I went back and cooked lobsters in summer of '84. And in fall of '84, Pete had moved to Connecticut and had gotten these calls from distributors and comic stores that had bought the first issue. And they said, are you guys going to do a second one? And we were like, well, we didn't think the first one would sell, so maybe we should do a second one. So this was the studio that we did the second issue in. I could afford a desk now. So it was great. I always like to bring up the second issue, not only because we got to do a second issue, thanks to the fans that bought them. But to me, this is, actually to both Peter and I, this is really when the dream came true, because when we got the orders from the second issue, it was 15,000 copies. The first issue sold 3,000 copies. And Pete had done this sheet of calculations. He said, if we do 6 of these a year, the profit that will split on each issue is about $3,000, so we could actually pay our rent, eat all the macaroni and cheese we want, and get our comic books for a living. So, starting with Turtles issue 2, that's where we, again, the dream came true for me and Pete, because we get to draw comic books full time, and my goodness, that's now 30 plus years ago, and I'm still doing it, and it's all your fault. Thank you. Yes, mustache looking much, much better now. That was actually me working on the first issue in Pete's studio, and that's Pete. We still, every time we printed the books, we'd bring them to the studio and we'd ship them off from there. So there's Pete standing next to issue number 2. Awesome. We were doing a lot of conventions at this time. That was the road show that we did. We'd drive up and down the coast. And Pete had I think a 73 Vega that you could actually walk faster than it could drive. That's how we would travel around and do shows. This is one of our early shows. I could even afford a tie then. So it's fun to see. I like to show, this is some of the earliest pages. This is the first page from Turtles issue 3. They're printed in black and white, but we use a special paper called dual shade paper, where we draw it, pencil it and ink it, and then when we do the shading technique, it actually gives it 2 other tones of gray. But when you actually look at the originals, it's in the sepia tone, which is kind of cool. So, San Diego Comic-Con. You guys have heard of San Diego Comic-Con? Yeah, it's crazy. The first year we went to Comic-Con, they were hoping for 10,000 guests there, 10,000 people overall. I think this year they had, what, 200,000 people? It's a completely different thing, but this was a real big moment for us because we heard about the legendary Comic-Con, and so this is our first year at Comic-Con. The legend, the man, Jack Kirby. This is probably, hands down, one of the greatest moments. Besides getting to draw comic books for a living, like we dreamed, we always wanted to be Jack Kirby, but then Pete and I got to meet Jack Kirby, and that's what he is. He was the coolest guy ever. I love to tell the story where, you know, the Comic-Con was so small in San Diego that Kirby came to the building and he'd say this, Kirby's here, Kirby's here, Kirby's here, Kirby's here. And all these people, you know, especially the guys like us, would run over. And I got to where he was, and he's sort of walking through this crowd, and he had about 30 people around him. And a fan had asked him a question about Captain America, and he gave this really awesome, exciting history and origin of Captain America to this fan. You know, you tell he was just so in love with what he did, and the guy next to him asked the same exact question, and he answered it the same way, with the same energy, the same enthusiasm. He was just the nicest guy ever. He deserved all the credit that he's ever gotten. He was a true legend. Casey Jones, you guys know Casey Jones? Casey Jones was the second human character. April was the first in issue 2. Casey Jones was the second, and we did this series around this time in comics. They were doing this 4-issue micro-series things, these little mini event things, and we said, well, if they're doing 4 issues, we'll have to do, you know, super micro-series where it's just 1 issue on each turtle. And also a popular theme this time was vigilantes, and it was always, they had these vigilante characters that had this really deep, dark, you know, horrific things happen to their family or their town or their city. And I just wanted to come up with a character that decided to be a vigilante because he watched too much bad TV. So, Casey used to watch 3 TVs at a time, and he was just the coolest. I came up with the hockey mask and the baseball bats, and he said, you know, wouldn't it be awesome if you had a golf bag on the back and had all these different kinds of weapons. So that's how Pete and I worked together. It was always, you know, bantering ideas back and forth in the studio. And here's some of the pages. Those are some of the pages. This is the first color cover of Turtles. The first 4 issues that we did were oversized. And we used to get a lot of complaints from comic stores and stuff because they couldn't fit them into bags, comic bags. So on the 5th issue, we went to a smaller comic book size, traditional comic book size, and this is the first color cover. And back in those days, I did the first color cover, and I painted all the bandanas red because it seemed cool to me, and I knew, you know, Pete and I knew who they were. And, you know, we changed them later for the cartoon, but I'll talk more about that in a sec. Pete and I did the first 16 issues together, and then ran the rest of the Turtle business. Every animated show, every movie, everything that you ever saw with the Turtles on it, we saw it first, and we worked on it. So these are some of my favorite pages from the original series. It was great to, you know, when we both started, we could draw, but we could draw, you know, in an amateur fashion, and it was great to be able to make a living while we learned how to draw better. So it was really cool. So some of my favorite pages. One of my favorite issues of the Turtles, I mentioned Cerebus earlier. Do you know Cerebus? He's an aardvark, Conan the Barbarian. Dave Sim was a big inspiration. He was a huge advocate for self-publishing. He wanted to, you know, guys like Jack Kirby, who created most of the Marvel Universe, you know, Thor, Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, all the things. He did it under work for hire, and so he usually lost all of his rights. He never made any of the profits that the corporations made. And Dave Sim was a real advocate for creators' rights, creators' ownership, and we believed in that, which is why we're so lucky with the Turtles to have ownership and control it the way we did. But this is us meeting Dave Sim. He's the creator of Cerebus, and I had this idea to do a Turtles Cerebus crossover, and that was our Turtles number 8. Still one of my favorite issues because it was just so nutty. I was like, you know, time traveling, sources of Apprentice, we had zombies, we had barbarians. It's like everything we sort of could put into it. We put into it. A couple of pages from that. That's Burnett, the time traveling Sorcerer's Apprentice. It was, you know, I wanted to have it. It was actually modeled after one of our studio guys, Steve Levine, had a girlfriend that was really klutzy, so she kept falling down a lot. Fun to do. Dave Sim did a Kickstarter campaign recently, and he wanted me to help him do one of these promotional things for his Kickstarter, and so we came up with this idea to introduce Matisse, the unknown turtle. Oh, this was so funny. We used to get so many awesome gifts from all our fans over the years, and there was a guy that used to work for Jim Henson at the Muppet Show, and he made this turtle for us. He was about 3 feet tall, and it was just the coolest thing ever. We just always felt a little uncomfortable. We would sort of make his mouth work. It just seemed really odd. Hand up inside, but he was great. Around this time, so we had success with a lot of the early issues, and we'd gotten a lot of calls from people that said, well, we think the Turtles could be more than just comic books. We think it'd be a cartoon show and toys and all that stuff. And we just thought that was even dumber than the fact that the cartoon show, that the comic book actually worked. But we started developing the toys with Playmates Toys, who still makes the toys today. And this is one of the early trips. Notice how the mustache is looking really good. This is one of the early trips we did the Playmates toys, and we were actually looking at physicals. These are the first prototypes that were sculptured with the Turtles and Rocksteady. So that's a pretty cool memory. In Toy Fair, 1988, we worked on the first 5 animated shows, and those came out between Christmas 1987, that holiday break for schools. And because of the success of them being on the air and they got good ratings, which again, you have to keep in mind, we didn't actually believe they'd actually be on TV. Remember the TV guide? Until we actually saw the Turtles listed, and it's going to be on TV. We saw it in the TV guide, so it's real. So when that came out in 1987 Christmas, in February of 1988, they introduced the toys. And it was later that year, June of 1988, the toys hit the toy shelves. And it was such a funny memory because Pete and I were living in Massachusetts at the time, and the big toy store chain at that time was KB Toys. Remember KB?
Yeah.
So Pete and I jumped in the car, we drove down to KB Toys in Springfield, and we wanted to actually physically see them on the shelves to see if it was real. And so as we're walking down to the action figure aisle, there's this mom dragging a young boy out of the action figure aisle saying, "I'm not buying you one of those stupid Ninja Turtles." Pete and I were like, "Oh my God, what have we done?" Back in those days, we had an awesome staff, a bunch of artists that we were fans of their work. At first, we published Mike Dooney's Gizmo and Ryan Brown's Rockola and many things. And as the Turtle Empire grew, because we controlled everything that was going on with the Turtles, again, we worked on 300 animated shows, we worked on 3 live-action movies, and just every toy we usually designed it in-house. The Archie comic series, we also wrote designers in-house. We had full control, and this is one of the early group shots of the gang that we just, we travel around the shows together. Now we can afford more than one desk. We actually have 2 desks. I like to show the shot because this is where most of everything you saw in the Turtles, especially in the early 90s, was all produced here. The work days were awesomely intense because we'd get in, banter for a little while, draw for an hour or 2, and then somebody would pull out a Nerf gun, and there'd be this big Nerf gun fight in the studio, and people would be throwing stuff, and then eventually we'd get back to work. But a lot of good memories and a great team of artists that helped us in the early days. This was the final page of issue number 11, which is the final issue that Pete and I did originally in the first run, and I always say that in a sense this was the final issue that we worked penciling, inking, and drawing and everything together on the stories. Over the years we worked on story ideas, concepts, worked with different artists and stuff. So we studied, and by then we were running, the Empire in the sense that in 1987 we were probably drawing 90% of the time, spending 10% of our time on business, and the very next year we were going to be 90% of the time doing business and 10% of our time drawing. So it was, a great transition because we own these guys and want to make sure everything with Turtles on them was done right. So, did you guys see the first movie? People often ask me what's my favorite version of the Turtles in all entertainment medium, and the first movie, hands down, is simply my favorite. It's the best version. And it was crazy because we, the success of the comics and the cartoon and the toys, everybody said, we now have to do a movie. And he said, how are you ever going to make those come to life on the big screen? Well, thanks to Jim Henson and his incredible creature stuff. Pizza. So yeah, we worked with Jim Henson, and we actually, his studio's Creature Shop was in London, so he'd send us photos and videotape and all that stuff, but we didn't see the actual Turtles until we were down on set. But man, he was the guy that really brought him to life. Steve Barron was a director who was just an actual incredible director. This is really down on the set in Wilmington, North Carolina. We got to meet Jim Henson, and the guy in the front, you see, he was running all of the technology that they created mostly to bring the Turtles to life. A lot of the technology that they made was patented and done just for the Turtles. As a puppeteer that runs the eyes and the nose and makes all the facial movements and makes them work. And I saw the movie recently on the big screen, and it's amazing how that first movie, I think, still holds up pretty well. And again, that's my favorite version. So. This was a trip. You saw the pages from Casey Jones in the story I showed earlier. Steve Barron was adamant that we stick as close as we can to the original comic series and bring some of those pages to life. And this was, a scene with Raphael and Casey fighting in the park, and then to see this actually happening And on set was just mind-blowing. And Elias Koteas was Casey Jones, and to me, he was the perfect Casey Jones. He really brought it to life. And he was so worried he wasn't doing a good job, but it was fantastic. Second time around shop, again, it burned down, and much like it did in the movie, and we did that in the original comic book. To see again that come to life on the big screen was really, really great. Now that mustache is looking awesome, isn't it? This was an English guy named David that wore the costume. He was just the coolest. He was one of the stunt guys. These costumes weighed about 80 pounds, and the fact that these guys could do spins and flips and all the stuff they could do with these costumes was just incredible. And so I made it pose with me, holding the turtle costume. It's kind of funny. That's great. These are some of my favorite covers from the early days. The original Turtle comic books were in black and white. We did a deal with Fresh Comics to do them in color, and I always liked to paint, but I never quite figured out how to do it, so I figured if I wanted to learn how to paint and do covers, then I would work at it. And so these are the first couple, and that's the cover number 4, so I like to show those. I learned how to draw and do what I do through the Turtles, and again, thanks to fans like you buying it, I could pay my rent and paint. As I mentioned earlier, that the idea of a turtle was, the first idea for the first turtle drawing was, what if Bruce Lee was a turtle? What would be the dumbest animal? That'd be the turtle. And my friend Mark Bodie, I'd known for years, huge Bruce Lee fan, so he said, why don't you do a homage to Bruce Lee? So Turtles number 18, we did this story called Shell of the Dragon, which was our huge tip of the hat to Bruce Lee, and one of my favorite issues. You guys reading the new IDW series? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
There's something doing now. About 3 years ago, I started working with IDW when they brought the series back, and so I co-write plot, do covers, and a couple graphic novels. I got another one coming out next year. But this is the process how I work. I thought it's a fun kind of behind the scenes. Traditionally, I do a blue pencil, like you see here, and I get the idea. Once I get the idea right, then I enlarge it and do it into a finished black and white piece. So that's basically what they look like, and then I've got awesome colors. Robert Patterson, who saves my butt usually every month. Someone's running late. This was a cover of Turtles 28. Pete and I did the original series, one of the original comic series where we did Turtles issue 50. Then we wrote a series called City at War. Tom, the writer at IDW, who's just a genius and the coolest guy to work with, we did the series called City Fall, where we sort of connected all the dots from all the original series. I mean, what we've done up to that point. And so Turtles 28 basically had everybody in it, and so I had to do this massive wraparound cover: Bebop, Rocksteady, April, Slash, everybody. And so I couldn't fit on one cover, so I just stretched it out. This was just my favorite piece in recent history. Nickelodeon, IDW. You seen the new Nickelodeon series? You guys follow that? So, to me, it was fantastic. The Nickelodeon took over. The whole thing's piloted by a guy named Cyril Neely, who grew up in Philadelphia, and his dad owned a pizza shop, and he was a Turtle fanatic when he was a kid. So Cyril really brought the Turtles to life in that he wanted to pay homage to the original series, the original cartoon, but then sort of take it in its own direction, but always going back and pulling characters and ideas out of all the 30 years of Turtle history that had come before. And we just had a blast. That's Cyril. This is what we were doing a press thing in Spain, and it was so funny. No matter where we've gone in the world, we've been to. We were actually in Argentina before we came here, and the Argentinian fans are just as super and awesome, as nice as you guys are here. It's amazing where we ever go in the world. The fans are the same. We're here for the love of the Turtles, and we love it. So, Ice Cream Kitty. I don't know if you guys know, it's like. I did the voice of Ice Cream Kitty on the cartoon show, and it was a funny story because Cyril always wanted me to do a voice, and he said, "But I come up with a really cool character for you to do in the show." And Courtney and I were at San Diego, and they were showing a preview of some of the new characters they've come up with, and we did a cat called Clunk in the Michelangelo Christmas special, and Cyril wanted to bring that back, and so did this drawing of a cat that ate ice cream with mutagen on it became Ice Cream Kitty, and it's Michelangelo's pet. So. And I said, I want to be Ice Cream Kitty. And they were like, no, we'll come up with something better. I said, no, I want to be Ice Cream Kitty. And so I got to be, I just want to wear a t-shirt that says Ice Cream Kitty. I'll make Courtney wear one that says I'm with Ice Cream Kitty. This is a graphic novel I did this year. It was great because Renette from Turtles issue 8 that I mentioned with the Dave Sim, we've been able to, in the comic series and the cartoon show, we've been able to go back and bring back some of our favorite characters from the past. And I wanted to bring Renette back, and I'm all of that after somebody I know, and it was a great inspiration for the character, Mrs. Eastman. So this was a graphic novel I did this year, time traveling story where the Turtles got to meet Renette again, and she's just as goofy and clumsy and awesome as ever. 30th anniversary of the Turtles, you believe it? Honestly, it's like, this year, Cody and I have done about 25 shows this year. It's hard to believe that it's been 30 years. It's hard to believe that, after 30 years, we're still talking about Turtles, and, look at this room full of awesome people. It's like, here we are 30 years later, and it's just the coolest, most awesome, I'm not worthy, but I love it, and thank you. Simon Bisley was an artist that I worked with a couple times over the years, and I wanted to bring Simon back for a special cover for the 30th anniversary, so I penciled it, and Simon finished it. Peter Laird, yay! Pete and I wanted to work together again for quite a while, and so when the 30th anniversary came up, I penciled this cover, and Pete finished it. And that's on the 30th anniversary. And then this was such an awesome idea is Greg Goldstein, one of the editors of IDW, he said, I love that first cover, that iconic, turtle standing on the rooftop, but I always wondered what happened 10 seconds later. And I said, that's a great idea. So this is a drawing inspired by what happens 10 seconds later, and I penciled it and Pete inked it, and it was just super cool. Heavy Metal Magazine, I don't know, some of the older fans might know Heavy Metal Magazine. It was a big inspiration for me when I was younger. I still own and I'm most of, but I still manage all the publishing for Heavy Metal. And in the 25 years I've been running Heavy Metal, I only did one cover, and this is the cover I did for it. So, it's too shy. Most of the artists that I publish in the magazine, I feel like they draw much better than I have. So I've also been inspired by something. Really great character idea. People always ask what my favorite Turtles crossover would be if it was a dream project. Turtles and Daredevil would be fantastic. I don't know if you know, again, when we was putting together the origin of the Turtles origin story is very similar to Daredevil's. Did you guys know that? Yeah. It's like a blind man walking out into the street in front of an oncoming truck. Young Matt Murdock jumps out to save the blind man, and as the truck locks up its brakes, this canister full of radioactive ooze comes out of the truck and hits young Matt Murdock near the eyes, blinds him, and makes him become Daredevil. But I was wondering what happened to the canister afterwards. So we had the canister continue bouncing down the street, and this poor young man was standing next to a open sewer cover with a bowl full of turtles. And that's where so that's really the inspiration. Then we did further because one of Daredevil's mentors was a guy named Stick. We had Splinter in Daredevil's book. They had an evil ninja clan called the Hand. We had the Foot. So we put all of our love into comics into the Turtles comic. Fans bring us the most awesome gifts. Courtney and I did a show in Arizona, so we wore those for half the day. It was really fun. And this is me in my studio today. No mustache. I finally gave up on it. But this is where we work, and all things Turtles come from here these days. So that's a little bit of history. That's a little bit of sort of something that I'd like to see. 14 minutes. Yeah. Thanks. So I guess what I did.
Shall say with that? Yeah.
Do you want to do some room yet? No.
Such a long history.
But yeah, if you guys have any questions, anything that I didn't address, or anything, you guys see the new Turtles documentary that came out this year? If you haven't seen it, it's worth checking out. It's like a Canadian company spent 5 years working on it, and we gave them unlimited access to all of our old archives, all of our videotapes, all that stuff, and they put together a great documentary with a couple of other cool 30th anniversary things that are coming. So, but yeah, unless there's any specific questions, if you have something you want to.
Oh, we'll take some questions. One thing I wanted to bring up, though, excuse me, you mentioned Dave Sim, now he's such an advocate for creator rights, excuse me. Now, the success of the Turtles and the way that licensing was handled seemed to, in some ways, it seemed to be one of the forerunners. It seemed to pave the way for other creators to realize, take a look and say, hey, look at what they're doing, these guys, the Turtles creators, look at how they're managing everything. Do you think you've helped pave the way for a lot of creators? in that respect?
Yeah, I think in many ways we did, but we were very lucky in that, I always say that we stand on the shoulders of giants because we were very aware of, guys like Jack Kirby and, the guys that created, whether it be Superman or, so many of the Marvel characters, DC characters, they never owned and controlled their rights, and the corporation then they could do whatever they wanted to, and we just thought that was a shame, first and foremost, because such genius people or such inspiration as those guys that made us want to draw. And so when we did we were working with being inspired by guys like Dave Sim and Wendy and Richard Pini, who did the Health Quest. They were also publishing before we did. They were a huge inspiration, but we knew how lucky we were to own and control our rights, and we really wanted to hold on to them. So I think it was inspiring for lots of our people up and coming at the time to try to keep the characters to yourself as best you can.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's take some questions.
Yep, this guy did.
I was wondering, how did you create the character of Shredder? You were taking all this episodes.
That's one of my favorite all-time stories.
Yeah, I like it.
We had when I moved into the Dover house that you guys saw, it was Pete and his wife, Janine, who was an awesome cook. And the deal was that she would cook dinner, and then Pete and I would do dishes. And Pete would usually wash, and I would dry, depending. And so one night, I was drying dishes, and those kind of rectangular metal cheese graters, you shred cheese on. And I was sort of slid my hand aside as I was drying it off, and I sort of reached through, and I said, held on, I said, man, could you imagine a bad guy with these little fins on the thing? They'd really shred your skin off. We could call him the grater or something. And Pete says, how about the shredder? And yes, that's it. So, we were having so much fun, especially coming up with the idea for that first issue. We were writing it solely for ourselves, and we just took the poke at anything funny that we thought would be funny. It was funny to us.
So every time you're approaching a new media for the turtles, let's say the initial of your TV show, does somebody else come up with that idea first and come to you? Do you come up with, hey, it's time for another movie? How does that process work?
Well, it depends. It's like in the early days, it was, as a TV show was going on every year, they'd want a new season, and so Pete and I would spend, pretty much most of the fall while the current season was on, working on the next season, and then they'd start production early so that, we sort of map out the storyline we wanted where the next season would go. And a lot of it's based on success too, like the first movie was a success, so the studio immediately wanted to do a second movie, and it kind of evolved. And then it was like, by the time we did the live action series with, I know everybody here loves Venus de Milo. Actually, the Venus de Milo character started as an idea for the fourth turtle movie. We were going to introduce a fifth turtle, but it was a male turtle named Curly. And we developed the animated show, the live action show for Fox. Margaret Lashley was running it, changed it at the last minute, and said, no boy turtle, I want a girl turtle. So we worked hard to make that show the best we could. And then it's a matter of, then the Turtles took kind of a break period for a while, like 4 or 5 years, and just somebody came back and said, we think it's time to bring them back, and we did the 2000 series, and then, a couple of years later, based on the success of that, we did that live action movie